Before we get into today's conversation, a question about your team. How big is the gap between what your team could be and how it actually runs? Next Level Teams from Leaders Rising Network is a cohort designed to build a higher performing team, one that talks straight, trusts each other, and delivers. The next cohort opens in September. Details at leadersrisingnetwork.com. There's a shot early in this episode that I keep playing over and over again in my head. A guy in a CRV turning down a Midwestern neighborhood street. Could be Ohio, could be Missouri. Obviously, we know it's Kansas City. Could be about 4 blocks from wherever you're listening to this right now. Nothing about the shot is telling you to pay attention. It's just a man driving a Honda through a normal American neighborhood. That's Ted Lasso. And here's what you need to know about the man in that car. He bagged groceries this morning. He works at a supermarket in Kansas City. He also won in the Premier League. He gave up the Premier League to move back to Kansas City because Kansas City is where his son is. The remarkable part of Ted Lasso is that he could be any of us. He's not exceptional. He's not gifted in some way that lets him off the hook and lets you off the hook. He drives a CRV, which means everything you're about to watch him do is accessible to you too, on Monday, in your actual job, in your everyday life. And I think that's what's so appealing about Ted Lasso. Let's get into this.
Welcome to the New Generation Leader Podcast. We're giving you the tools you need to lead in the digital world. Ready to reach your true potential? This is the New Generation Leader Podcast.
I want to give you the number one leadership lesson of this whole episode, kicking off season 4 right at the top, because everything else we talk about today is going to hang off of this idea. But keep in mind, this podcast episode is one giant spoiler alert. So if you want to watch episode 1 before you listen to this podcast, I'd go ahead and turn this off right now. Don't say I didn't tell you. Here's the idea. You never know the impact of what you do. You don't. You don't get a report. There's no dashboard. The moments that end up mattering most to the people you lead are almost never the moments you thought were important when you were in them. And here's what that says to us. Because we can't see the impact, we get anxious. And when leaders get anxious, we tend to do one thing every single time. We add. We take on more, we show up to more, we try to be a little bit of everything for everyone, because if you can't tell which part of you is landing on the people around you, the safest bet feels like to do all of it, be everything. And I think that's the trap that this episode is about. And by the end of it, Ted's going to forget to charge his kid's iPad, and that's going to explain everything. So let's head into the grocery store. Ted Lasso, who coached at the highest levels of 2 sports, because remember, he was an American football coach before he was an English football coach. Ted's working in a supermarket in Kansas City. And the way he works, checking out groceries for customers, is completely on brand for Ted. He's not phoning it in. He's not doing the job while visibly being a guy who used to do something else. He's not too high to work the front line. And the principle underneath that, this is what I would write down. Everyone gets the best of Ted. The lady checking out with her groceries, his coworker at the next register, his manager. Not the best he has left over after the important people got theirs, not the version of him that's still checking his phone, but the best. There's something bigger happening in this opening scene than just Ted's humility. And I don't want to miss it by just calling it humility. Because Ted's trade from the highest echelons of professional sports back home to Kansas City, Ted traded status for proximity. And that wasn't a spiritual decision. It wasn't some high and mighty. It was the simple math. He worked out what he actually wanted to be near. And then he paid for it with the thing everybody told him he was supposed to protect. Most of us do that math backwards. We protect the title, and we spend the proximity of being close to the people around us. We tell ourselves the proximity will come later, after this season, after this major project, after this push, after this year, when we retire. But what if we could have it now? So which one are you leaning towards? The title or the proximity? Because you're probably leaning towards one of them right now. There's a second thing that happens at that supermarket, and it's one of the best leadership moments in Ted Lasso. It's the kind of throwaway moment that many writers would probably skip over, but not Jason Sudeikis. Ted catches an employee stealing. He's just slipping a pack of cigarettes from an elderly woman checking out at the front register, slips them into his apron, hides them in his locker later. Now, you know how the script tends to go in these moments. Script 1, you make it a thing. You pull him in, you raise your voice, you yell at him, you make sure he understands the gravity of the situation, and you tell him, don't ever do this again. Script 2 is you file this away, and you bring it up later. You make a note, collect more information, figure out the ideal time and the right moment to approach the subject. Which script does Ted use? Neither one. He builds a brand new situation right there on the floor in the real time. He asks his coworker to cover for him and puts together this plan. The situation that he builds is designed to let the guy see for himself just how ridiculous stealing is. So, what does Ted do? Ted steals items himself. He's got cookie dough in his apron, candy stuffed in his socks. Ted steals items himself. He's got cookie dough in his apron, Ted steals items himself. He's got cookie dough in his apron, candy stuffed in his socks. The moment gets interrupted before it even finishes, but it had already done what Ted set out to do. For Ted, the goal was never to get the guy to comply with the rule. The goal, Ted wanted something bigger for him. He wanted him to actually make a change and never do this again. Because the person who's been yelled at to stop has learned just one thing, that you're a hothead. Yelling makes it about you more than about that person and their behavior. But a person who saw it himself, who watched a version of himself played out in front of him, like this guy watched Ted stealing things, hiding things, pulling them out from his socks. He's learned something about himself now and finally sees himself in the mirror. And that's the most powerful lesson any of us can learn, when we actually have a chance to look in the mirror. And Ted let him keep his dignity, which means he let him keep coming back to work with his head held high and a new level of respect for Ted and a new level of respect for customers. Correction ends a relationship or fractures the relationship even when it technically works. But for Ted, this somehow raised the respect this young man has for him, raised the respect this young man has for himself. And I think it would be a lesson that any of us would remember for a lifetime. Now, some of you are going to hear that and say, okay, come on, building a little scenario instead of having a direct conversation, that's just conflict avoidance with better lighting. It's a better Hollywood story. I don't think that argument holds up, though. And the reason it doesn't hold up is what I want you to take with you. Because Ted didn't avoid conflict, and he didn't delay the hard conversation. That's what avoidance would be. But Ted made the lesson happen right then and there. But instead of telling the guy head on, he showed him. That's the difference. That's not avoidance. Avoidance isn't a question of how loud you are. It's a question of timing. People avoid by being quiet. People avoid by doing it later. I'll bring it up at his review. I'll wait for a better moment. Let me see if it happens again and if this becomes a pattern. Later is where the avoidance comes in. And later sounds very reasonable. But notice which one of these options is really the hardest. Yelling is kind of lazy. It's instant, it takes no thought, and it mostly discharges the leader's frustration instead of actually solving the employee's behavior problem. What Ted did was harder. It was more designed, it was more scripted, but it was on exactly the same timeline. It was immediate, it was in the moment. He gave up, though, the satisfaction of yelling at the guy, but he kept the outcome of actually changing the behavior. That's wisdom. That's leadership maturity. Doing the hard thing immediately without needing it to feel good. So, think about the last thing you let slide until a better moment. Was there ever actually going to be a better moment? And then in the same store, seconds later, Ted runs into Joe. Joe played for Ted during the American football chapter of his life. Years ago, Joe's grown now. He's got a wife, he's got a kid, and here they are standing in the grocery store aisle. Ted meets Joe's kid, and then Joe introduces his wife. And when Ted gets ready to walk away, he uses both of their names. That's the first thing. Here's the second thing, and this is where the episode got me. Joe's wife already knows who Ted is. She's never met him, but she knows exactly who he is because for years at home, Joe has described this man as the greatest role model of my life. This didn't make sense at all to Joe's wife. The assistant manager at the grocery store, who seems a little odd on the surface, Ted finds this out in the grocery store aisle, in an apron, by accident. He wasn't building that. He wasn't asking for that. He was just being the same consistent guy over and over everywhere he went for years. And it stacked up somewhere he was never going to see it. I want to tell you a story about Tom. Tom and I led a retreat together years ago. There were 25, 30 leaders in a room over the weekend. And the day before that retreat, as Tom and I are sitting in a cafe, Tom started studying. Now, he wasn't studying the content or the slides, he was studying the names. He came to me and asked me for the list. Who's going to be in the room? And then he quizzed himself. He asked me to quiz himself. He wasn't willing to put his own uncertainty on 25, 30 people who were about to walk through the door. He wanted to know them. And so the next day, he welcomed every single one of them with this incredible gusto, by name. And I watched what happened in their eyes. That's where I saw this whole experience come to life, because someone had invested intentionally in them before he'd ever even met them, and they could feel it. They could tell that Tom was for them. Now, here's the word I keep landing on for what Tom did. It's a word we use to define this kind of leadership, and it usually ends up being a win-win for everyone. And that word is liberation. Here's how this played out. It liberated Tom because a host who hasn't prepared spends the whole first hour working through name tags, scanning name tags, stalling on names, trying to manage that awkward first interaction with somebody. Tom paid that bill the night before. So when the door opened, all he had to do was be there. Preparation is what buys presence. You can't be all the way in a room that you're still trying to keep up with. So Tom liberated himself, and it liberated those 25, 30 people, every single one of them. Because walking into a room where you're already known means you don't have to introduce yourself or explain yourself or perform some version of yourself to earn your standing. Most of us spend the first hour of any kind of meeting just trying to earn the right to be there. Tom gave people that hour back and walked in eye to eye, face to face, and the room was different because of what happened. Now, here's what I really want you to hold on to from this. Not a single one of them knew how hard Tom had studied. They never thought about that. They didn't know about the list or the questions or the time in the cafe. The investment was completely invisible, but the effect wasn't. If you'd stopped one of those leaders in the hallway and asked how it felt to walk into that room, they would have told you it felt great. They felt welcomed. They just knew somebody had been expecting them, though. They didn't know why. Here's the other side. Tom, like Ted standing in that grocery store aisle with Joe and his wife and his kid, Tom never saw what I saw. He was busy greeting people and diving into conversation. I was watching their faces. And I was calculating the impact of every single one of them, which means I've been carrying a story with a piece of Tom's legacy that Tom himself doesn't even have. Same thing happened to Ted in that grocery store aisle. Just from the other direction, Ted found out by accident. You don't get to watch your own effect. You only get to cause it. and somebody is describing you to their spouse, their roommate, their kid tonight. Somebody's eyes lit up in a room that you had already left. You don't get a vote on their reaction. The only vote you ever get was how you did it when it didn't seem to matter, and whether you did the work the night before when nobody could see you doing it. So Keely, Rebecca, Higgins, they get on a plane, they fly to Kansas City, and they ask Ted to come coach the new women's team at Richmond. And the line they use is, "We want you to lay the foundations of the Richmond culture that you created for the men's team." I want you to notice what they asked for and what they didn't ask for. They didn't ask for the playbook. They didn't ask for him to train somebody. They didn't ask for a document or a process or a system. They asked for the man. They wanted Ted. And I think there's maybe a challenge underneath all of this. And I don't think the episode fully answers it. If a culture can only be refounded by the person who founded it in the first place, did it ever actually become the culture? Or did it just live in this one guy the entire time, and everybody mistook that for culture? You can argue it either way. Both might lead you somewhere. The generous version is that culture isn't a document. It moves by the proximity you have with people. Putting the source in the room multiplies culture faster, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the harder, more challenging version is that they probably should have been able to grow the culture by now. Couldn't someone else keep multiplying that culture? Hadn't Ted invested in everybody else that they could bring this culture to life? I guess Ted's got his work cut out for him this season, and honestly, there wouldn't be a show if Ted had truly multiplied the culture. The test of what you've built is not how it runs while you're standing there. The test is whether anybody has to come get you to fix it later. I want to stick with one of the people in that traveling party, and it's Higgins. Higgins is carrying around this worry that nobody actually assigned to him to carry. He's worried about the details of another football club folding their women's team. And he's not really worried about the headline, but he's worried about the details that the headline represents. Higgins is the guardian in this crew, making sure every T is crossed and every I is dotted. He's the logical process guy at AFC Richmond. Every team has one, not just football teams, every team. And if they don't have one, they badly need one, because the guardian is the person tracking what we're in danger of losing, while everybody else is tracking what we've already won or what we're trying to win. And I want to underscore this part. The guardian is almost never the loudest person in the room. They're certainly not wowing the audience with a vision and a compelling picture of the possibilities. Guardians are also almost never the ones who get credit, and they're almost always experienced by leadership as friction. And that's where we pick up Higgins. Higgins is bringing friction into this story because their concern always arrives as a cost. It's right at the moment you're trying to make a move. You're getting ready to launch some big new initiative. You might find this guardian a little frustrating, but that's the sign that you have a guardian. So Higgins, being the tourist, wants to go to the Jazz Museum, but it's closed for a private event, so he goes to the Negro League's Baseball Museum. From soccer to baseball seems a little out of left field in the moment of this episode, but stick with this. The Negro Leagues existed because black players were shut out of Major League Baseball. That's the reason, not a preference, not a business decision, a country that had decided these guys didn't get to play. And yet these guys built a thriving league. Barnstorming buses, doubleheaders, sometimes 3 games in a day, and a level of baseball that the people who watched it never stopped talking about for the rest of their lives. That's the legacy in the story Higgins walks into, knowing next to nothing about baseball, which in a football movie, soccer for us Americans, and someone who works at that museum tells him about Satchel Paige. Ain't no man can avoid being born average, but there ain't no man got to be common. Take it back to that Honda on the street that Ted's driving. Average is the room that we're standing in. Common is how we behave in it. Ted didn't pick the apron at the grocery store. Satchel Paige didn't pick the bus. Nobody chooses their room or their situation or their life. But nobody in that museum was common, and I'd argue the people who get shut out have never been the ones who were average. So look at what this one man, Higgins, is holding on to in this afternoon. He walks into a museum about people who weren't allowed to play. He's carrying the headline from the morning on a team that just got told it doesn't play anymore. And at the same time, he's carrying a headline in his head, a plan for Richmond's new team that hasn't even started yet. And the story of Satchel Paige, that ain't no man got to be common. And for Higgins, ain't no woman got to be common. This experience unlocks the vision for Higgins of what they're trying to build. Late in the episode, Ted forgets to charge Henry's iPad. Some of you know the 70-30 principle already. Your 70 is your strength. The thing that when you're doing it, you're bringing your best and energy flows effortlessly. Your 30 is draining. It's your weakness. It's definitively not energizing for you. And here's the part people don't want to hear. No amount of being extraordinary at your 70 will ever buy you competence in the things in your 30. Some things you're just never going to. Ted is a generational talent at making people around him feel seen. Not smart people, not high-performing people, everyone. And Ted can't remember to charge an iPad. Now, put that next to where we started, because you never see your impact. The instinct is to add more, be everything for everyone, cover every base yourself, because you can't tell which one is important. You beat yourself up for not charging the iPad. But being everything for everyone is exactly what destroys the impact you were never going to see. See, everything Ted is remembered for lives in a narrow band. The attention, the names, the dignity, the showing up as the same guy twice in a row, every single time. Nobody in that grocery store is going home and telling their spouse about Ted's checkout skills. They're talking about how he made them feel. So look at what this show actually built. Ted's 30 is details. Higgins' entire function at AFC Richmond is details. Ted's 30 is Higgins' 70. That's probably not an accident in the writing because the contrast makes it interesting, but it also shouldn't be an accident on your team. Higgins isn't Ted's assistant. Higgins is the part of the job that Ted would do badly. Yet the job is held by a man who does it beautifully. And that's the only reason Ted ever gets to be Ted. So, your 30 isn't a thing to fix. It's a thing to find in your Higgins. And you can't go find it until you can say out loud what it is. You don't have to do everything and be amazing at everything. You don't even have to be Ted. But there's some intentionality behind this that's important to pay attention to. One last thing. After years in England, Ted still doesn't like tea. A whole life that he's built and unbuilt and rebuilt, moved back and forth across the pond, and he never once pretended. Think about how cheap that would have been. Faking a taste for tea, it doesn't cost anything. It's something easy he could have been doing because everybody wanted him to do that. And yet, he wouldn't do it. The consistency of being yourself isn't being stubborn. It's made him somebody that people want to follow in the first place. People could copy Ted. People could be like Ted because he was the same guy time after time after time. And here's what he did. He chose the most important things every time. He gave up the Premier League to be near one boy, his son. He never learned to like tea. He forgot the iPad, and he let Higgins carry the details. And in a house he'd never once visited, a woman he'd never met knows him as the greatest role model of her husband's life. You don't become somebody's legacy by being everything. You become one by being the same thing over and over when nobody can see you doing it. You'll never watch it happen, but it's always worth it. Episode 2 is coming. We'll see you next week.